Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that you actually have the option to either be a sugar burner or a fat burner? It's called having a metabolic advantage, as Dr. Ben Beekman would put it. You can actually burn your own stored body fat for fuel. On this show, we talk about ketogenesis, fasting, biohacking, all with the goal of optimal body composition for longevity and having the highest possible quality of life. I hope you enjoy these interviews and solo casts that I present to you, all with this goal in mind. Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Fast Keto. Today is a shorter episode, just doing a solo cast with some updates. I was doing some of these solo cast episodes about once a week, but got really busy with studying for my sport nutrition specialist final, which I passed. I got 86%, and I'm now officially a nutrition specialist. SNS is the designation for sport nutrition specialist, and I was doing that concurrently while studying for my biomedical science program, which I've been doing at U of T, and that finishes up in February of 2020. So I've been a busy little bee studying and keeping up with all my usual work with Ketogenic Girl, and it's been taking up more of my time than average just to have both of those programs going on at the same time. But now I get to have a little bit of a break, and for a few weeks I don't have to study anything, which feels awesome. And it's really nice just to be able to reset a little bit and also know that my nutritionist and sport nutrition specialist program is concluded, so I don't need to study that every day anymore, which is a really, really nice change because it was taking up a lot of my time during the day doing all of that every day, and I really enjoyed it. I was really, enjoying the content a lot, which is great. And the best part about all of this is just how much I'm learning, especially with biology, with biochemistry, with biomedical science. It's helping me so much just to be able to communicate the science and scientific pathways behind keto and the science of being fat adapted, the science of being fat fueled and being keto adapted. I just love the science of being fat adapted and how it really aligns us, in my opinion, back with how our physiology is actually designed. And I see that every day when I'm studying all of this stuff. So it's really, really cool to get to study all of this. And today's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about some updates and a recent post that I did about insulin and sodium. So we're going to dive into all of that right after this. All right, guys. So as I mentioned, today's episode is a little bit of an update, and I was updating you on my status with studying. I am resuming and continuing my biomedical science program to become a biomedical scientist. Kind of officially will be in February of 2020. So I have a couple more really interesting courses to get through. I finished biochemistry last year and physiology and anatomy, and I'm now doing gross anatomy and pharmacology. So it's really interesting to learn about the body's organs, get more into detail, not just about the systems of how they all interact, which I learned in physiology and anatomy, but gross anatomy, I'll be learning more about specific organs and how our body is set up and structured and how those different systems work together. And I think that's going to be very interesting just to know a little bit more about the detail. But I'm really excited also about the pharmacology and pharmacokinetics because I want to learn and understand more about how drugs interact with the body, how they work in the body, why they work, and then some of the pathways as well of why side effects occur when we take drugs. And this also applies to supplements. And I think it's going to be really interesting and to help me learn more about supplements, because supplements and drugs act in many of the same ways. And I was just looking the other day at steroids and how they function and how and why they cause so many side effects in the body, because they actually shut down certain pathways in an effort to reduce inflammation. And there are certain foods that we supplement with that have really powerful anti-inflammatory effects on the body. So specifically our omega-3 essential fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids have really powerful anti-inflammatory effects. And these act very similarly to some drugs and steroids. And then we also have steroid hormones in the body, which have different effects and signaling effects in the body. So it's all extremely fascinating stuff. And I'm really excited to finish up the last 7 months or so here of studies so I can officially be not only a nutrition specialist, but also biomedical scientist. And I think this has really been a great combination for me, because every time that I studied nutrition when it was at university and post-university, I just got so frustrated with the outdated information. And I didn't want to be studying and taking exams on how bad saturated fat is for us, how we need to avoid cholesterol and eat high carb. And I have to deal with that a little bit with the biochemistry and biomedical science program, but it's a very minute, because we really just focus on the scientific facts, and those are much less influenced. And it was the same with my nutrition specialist and sport nutrition specialist program. Is a lot of it focused more on the actual science behind different macronutrients and how they act on the body and the biochemical pathways for energy use. And, when we're oxidizing fats more, when we're oxidizing glucose. And so the focus is more on that and less on demonizing lipids and fat intake. And there was a really heavy emphasis on carbohydrate intake for athletes, but that is understandable. And what was nice to see is that there was a really healthy emphasis on protein intake. And so I really find that this combination has been fantastic for me personally in terms of what I'm doing and wanting to contribute to the science of being fat adapted and being keto adapted. And this combination of being a sport nutrition specialist, a nutrition specialist, and biomedical scientist together is a more powerful, beneficial combination for me to learn and understand the science. And continuing to understand biomedical science and medicine as I further my studies is going to be really interesting and just helping me to achieve my goal, which is to contribute to the knowledge and science that we have about ketogenesis, about ketones, and really about aligning our nutrition with supporting optimal health. So I hope that provides a little bit of an update of what I've been up to. I'm preparing to speak at a couple of upcoming events. One is in Toronto coming up next month, so in about 3 to 4 weeks. And then I'll be speaking at a biohacking conference here in Prague. And I'm considering also speaking in Moscow at a biohacking event, but we'll see how that goes with scheduling, because there might be some scheduling conflicts. So looking at doing some really interesting new events. And I love getting to speak at these events and connecting and sharing with people in person. I do so much of this work online, and it's so nice to get to be around all of you. Like at KetoCon, I had such a blast just getting to be with all of you, so many of you who are there who listen to the podcast. And it just makes me so happy to actually get to connect and hang out and spend time with people who are super interested in this stuff as well, and the science behind fat burning and being fat fueled and keto adapted, and how beneficial it is for our physiology. On that note, one of the things that I've been really interested in, and is kind of the focus of today's episode, is on sodium and insulin. And I did a post about it. I've been researching it for a while now, but I found a study that specifically explained the connection between high insulin and sodium retention. So this study in particular, which I will put in the show notes here, and I also mentioned in my post, I did a big post on Instagram about it, and over on Twitter, I've been tweeting about it quite a bit and sharing the study, and also a chart with some research done by Verta. And I've been trying to figure out what is the connection between sodium intake and sodium retention and insulin and carbs, because our body needs sodium. And this is one of the things that I was absolutely fascinated by when studying biochemistry, is how vital sodium is in order for our bodies to do anything. In our cells, we have, these cell membranes, which are the walls of our cells, and they are regulated. They have this voltage, and this voltage is usually about -70 millivolts, and it's maintained by having a ratio of sodium to potassium inside and outside the cell. And so sodium is extremely vital for our cells to open up and for things like glucose to get in. We have these glucose transporters, but for things to get in and out of the cell, we have these sodium and potassium channels. And the same thing goes for calcium. For our muscles to do anything and to fire off action potentials and get work done, we need calcium. So sodium is incredibly important. And it really made me wonder, why do we get all these warnings all the time against sodium intake and making sure we reduce our sodium intake? And we're always hearing about how bad excess sodium is for us. And it turns out that there is actually a connection between high carb intake leading to excessively high levels of insulin, and that this study showed that higher insulin in obese patients actually caused higher sodium levels because it caused the kidneys to release and excrete less sodium by reabsorbing the sodium. So this is the reason why on keto, and when people go very, very low carb, we actually excrete a lot of sodium. So our insulin levels go down because sugar intake and carb intake and processed carbohydrate intake goes down. Our insulin levels come down. And this is what causes the body to reabsorb less sodium. And so we release more sodium. And this is why people lose so much water weight, and why a lot of people go through this sort of keto flu period of adaptation where they feel really low energy and lethargic and tired. And I always say, I never experienced keto flu because I really maintained my electrolytes. And we can do this by supplementing with bone broth. It's one of the reasons you hear all the time about the importance of electrolytes on keto and low carb. And bone broth is really high in sodium. It's also, in my opinion, why bone broth is so helpful when we're sick or we have a cold or a flu. It's because bone broth is full of electrolytes, and it really, really helps maintain our energy levels. And I recently experimented with this a little bit because when I was in Denver, we had a 4th of July party and ended up catching a cold from my uncle. And I haven't had a cold in years. It's been so many years, I think 4 or 5 years since I had a cold. And my mother-in-law and I both caught this cold, and I decided to experiment by really maintaining my electrolyte levels up. So I took electrolyte pills, I took magnesium, iodine, sodium, potassium, and I also supplemented with some bone broth. But I mostly took these sodium, potassium, magnesium pills, and my mother-in-law was bedridden the entire time we had the same cold. I felt great every day. I had no headache. She had really, really strong headaches every day and had to lay in bed for about just, I think, 7 or 8 days. She was still able to do some things, but she had to lay in bed because her headache was so strong. I had zero headache the entire time. In fact, every day I continued with my morning walk or hike, which was about 40 minutes. And I had other symptoms that she was having. So I had a sore throat and I had a runny nose, but I didn't have the headache, which is what normally confines me to bed and makes me want to lay in bed, is really the headache. But because I maintained my electrolytes so high, I had no headache. And so I think there's a really strong association between what people experience as keto flu is with having this loss of sodium, because when the insulin levels fall really rapidly from going on low carb or very low carb or keto, the nephron in the kidneys it's in the distal tubule, is not reabsorbing sodium. It's releasing that sodium. And so there's this really strong connection, according to this study, between sodium levels, sodium retention, and insulin. And it explains why we lose so much sodium. And with that, we lose all the water that is bound to sodium in the body. And this is why we release so much water weight. We see a massive, change on the scale when we go keto or low carb. Some of that is muscle glycogen and liver glycogen. So we store sugar, we store glucose in the form of glycogen, which are these chains of glucose units. We store them in our muscle and we store them in our liver. And when you go keto, you also deplete your glycogen. So that's another reason why we lose a lot of water weight. But a big part of it and why we experience keto flu is because of this lack of sodium. Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 28-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group. And you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com. And it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. According to Virta Health, which is the organization that was created by Finney and Volek, who are the grandmasters of keto. And one of the reasons we have so much science about ketogenic diets is all through them. And they did some research looking at the optimal levels of sodium that we need to have in the body. And they found that there's actually the lowest associated mortality with having more sodium than government guidelines. Government guidelines are about 2.3 grams of sodium per day. We actually need about 5 grams of sodium per day. And sodium is not salt. Sodium itself, to get 5 grams of sodium, we need about 12 grams of salt. And 12 grams of salt is about 2.5 teaspoons of salt, gives us 5 grams of sodium per day. So that's a really good level to ensure that someone is getting if they're doing keto or very low carb, or even low carb in some cases. And you can often get that sodium from your food, just from your actual food, because we do have a lot of sodium in beef, in vegetables. There is sodium and potassium and magnesium electrolytes in that food, but it may not be enough to actually reach that 5 gram amount, which is why supplementing with bone broth is so great on keto. And, even just adding a 1/4 teaspoon of salt to your water, at a time, up to a 1/2 teaspoon. If you're feeling sluggish or tired, or you're feeling off, you're feeling that keto flu. And this is something that needs to be done daily, because these levels don't transfer over from day to day. This is a daily requirement of 5 grams of sodium. And this level, 5 grams of sodium, is associated with the lowest mortality in the research done by Virta Health. I'll put that chart in the show notes as well. But mortality is much higher, has a much higher association at less than 5 grams. And mortality association is much lower with excess sodium than it is with too low sodium. So 5 grams per day is the optimal level, and it's much more dangerous to not have enough sodium than it is to have higher levels of sodium. But when we're eating a standard American diet that's really high in processed foods and sugar that causes higher insulin levels, this causes the kidneys to retain and not excrete about half the amount of sodium. So someone who's on a standard American diet or a diet that's high in carb or, high in processed carbohydrates and sugar, they may not need to supplement with sodium. They may actually need to be mindful of sodium levels because it's possible that the kidneys, because they're excreting less sodium, that their sodium levels are actually quite high from the higher insulin, which is causing that sodium retention, and just the salt and sodium that tends to be in processed foods. So you really get this double whammy when you go keto and low carb in terms of losing sodium, because you have less sodium in the processed foods. And then the lower insulin causes the kidneys to not reabsorb as much sodium in the distal tubule of the nephron. And so this is why the kidneys then release more sodium, release more water, and why sodium levels really need to be supplemented when our insulin levels come down from eating less sugar, eating less processed foods. And because less processed foods in the diet and eating more real whole foods mean that we're just going to have less sodium in general. There's still going to be some sodium and electrolytes coming from food sources, but in most cases, it would be really helpful to, use a food tracker. I use MyFitnessPal. I love it, but you can use a food tracker and look at the levels of sodium that you're getting per day to see, are you getting that 5 grams per day of sodium, not just salt? That's about 12 grams of salt per day, or 2.5 teaspoons. Are you getting that through your food? Do you need to maybe add, half a teaspoon, a quarter teaspoon, or a little bit more bone broth in order to feel your best and feel as good as you did eating high carb? And it makes me wonder about so many other connections. Is the reason that we crave carbohydrates and sugar, is there a connection there to sodium levels and our body just wanting to maintain optimal levels of sodium? Could that be possible? Theoretically, it could be. It could be one of the reasons that we crave carbs, why we crave salty foods like nuts, why we crave dairy, why we crave different foods. It could be because of sodium. It could be not just the sort of umami sensation, which I've talked about before on the podcast, which is similar to the sensation that we get from eating meat, which comes from umami, but it could be sodium. And then there's all these other connections out there from sodium intake and iodine. So it's important to make sure that, as long as you're a healthy individual, you don't have complications with your thyroid, that iodine is actually needed in the body to combine with tyrosine in order to make thyroid hormones. So sometimes when we switch from regular forms of salt to sea salt, there's less iodine. And it's possible that there's a connection between sodium and not getting enough sodium, not getting enough iodine, because we are told to reduce our sodium intake and be very mindful of sodium on high carb and standard American diets, that we could be not getting enough sodium, not getting enough iodine, and therefore lowering our body's ability to combine iodine and tyrosine and make thyroid. So there's so many different connections out there that could be stressing the body, causing cortisol. I'm really, really fascinated right now by this topic. And if you have any research on it,
I would love to receive it. Email it to me at contact@ketogenicgirl. I have been looking into some of the studies into it, but I'm really, really fascinated by this topic. And I think it is so interesting and so important for anyone who's doing keto or low carb to really know what the optimal intake of sodium is per day. And it seems that our cells really require sodium to do pretty much anything. And in order for nutrients to get into our cells and open up, we have these voltage gated channels and we have just regular non-voltage gated membranes on our cells, and they need to be able to open up to let nutrients in. And, there is this connection as well with insulin. When our cells become insulin resistant, that they become resistant to insulin and they become locked or shut down. So we can't actually get glucose into the cells. We can't get nutrients into the cells. And this is, in my opinion, theoretically, what creates a lot of nutrient starvation in people, and why we see a lot of times excess adipose, excess fat on people. And we see that there's also this really lack of nutrient intake. We see, swollen abdomens, which is not all fat. There's this swelling effect that you see sometimes. And you see people who are really, really nutrient deprived, even though they're not energy deprived, they're getting tons of energy. And Dr. Ted Naiman talks a lot about how humans will tend to overeat energy in order to get our nutrient needs met as opposed to undereat it. And so this is one of the reasons and one of the factors that's really driving obesity in society today is really this lack of nutrients that can come from excess insulin or hyperinsulinemia in the body, which is shutting down the cell's ability to get nutrients in. But it also could be related to inadequate sodium intake and inadequate electrolytes, which is then preventing the cells from letting nutrients in. And also just the fact that processed foods is just really nutrient, I don't know what the opposite of dense is, but the opposite of nutrient dense. Pretty much a lot of our food is devoid of nutrients. When it is processed, the more it's processed, the more we lose nutrients in treating it with heat, in making it hyper palatable, for our taste buds and our, creating this bliss point and these different effects that make food so addictive and keeps us buying it. So anyway, those are some thoughts that I wanted to share with you guys, give you a little bit of an update on my studies for anyone interested in that, and some more information on the importance of sodium intake just for feeling good, feeling really energized. I coach and work with a lot of people, and I'm able to provide this guidance through my program and coaching. But I really get sad when I hear about people who try keto and low carb and eating real foods, and they stop because they don't feel good and they feel fatigued and feel tired and they get discouraged. And so they go back to eating standard American diet, and oftentimes it's just the connection to sodium and not having enough electrolytes and not having enough sodium. This keto flu makes people feel sad and sluggish and makes people not feel good when they're trying out eating real whole foods. And it's just getting past that and it's really making sure that sodium levels are being met adequately, that can enable someone to really experience the benefits of eating really nutrient-dense foods and feeling fantastic, and just being able to get past that keto flu by supplementing with electrolytes and really supplementing with sodium is so important to prevent people from getting discouraged when they try going off of sugar. It's so hard to go off of sugar and processed foods just on its own. Making that lifestyle change is really, really challenging, and you want to put everything, all the odds kind of on your side when doing this. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge the significant role that sodium has in our physiology and optimal function. And we make sure that we are really getting that sweet spot of 5 grams of sodium, which equates to about 12 grams of salt or 2.5 teaspoons of salt through food sources and supplementing with sodium and electrolytes and really high quality sodium. And it may or may not be also important to be supplementing with iodine depending on your status, your thyroid status. I need to do more research on that, but it is an interesting topic to learn more about and for all of us to connect and share more about this information and how it can be helpful for people who are wanting to make this change and eat more real whole foods and put the odds on their side when doing it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this information. I'll be looking forward to sharing more and more as I research these other fascinating topics and having more fantastic guests on and more physicians and doctors. We're seeing more and more physicians and doctors who are becoming interested in nutrition, and it's really, really cool to see that happening. You know, there are some incredible doctors out there who have paved the way for other MDs and doctors to be able to look into nutrition and preventative medicine and root cause medicine. And I'm so thankful for those doctors who faced a lot of adversity when it was very dangerous for them to be talking about these topics. And it's because of them that other doctors are now able to look into this stuff as well. And we owe them such a great debt of gratitude. So I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week so far. I'm wishing you a fat-filled rest of your week. And if you are interested in trying out keto with me, you can check out the Ketogenic Girl Challenge at ketogenicgirl.com. It comes with my coaching and support if you have been wanting to try keto, if you've been doing keto and you're not getting your weight loss or fitness or health goals, and you'd love to have me there to answer any questions that you have along with my meal plans, helping you to get to your goals. Check it out at ketogenicgirl.com. I would love to have you join the program and be your personal coach and guide in getting to your results. So check that out at ketogenicgirl.com. If you think this episode would be helpful to anyone, be sure to share it with them. Leave me a rating or review. It helps me be able to devote more of my time to creating these episodes for you. So until the next episode, I'm sending you lots of love, wishing you a fat-adapted, fat-fueled rest of your week, and thanks for listening.
A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.